Hello, my name is Lucia.
And I'm Joelle.
We're teens on the Shy Teen Lit Fest Advisory Council.
And we are very, very happy to have Dina Nayeri all the way from Paris with us today to answer some of our questions about writing memoirs and personal essays.
Dina Nayeri. Oh, hello.
Hi, thank you guys for having me. It's great to be here.
Dina Nayeri is the author of The Ungrateful Refugee, winner of the Geschwister Scholl Prize.
Good try.
And finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and the Kirkus Prize. Her essay of the same name was one of the Guardian's most widely read long reads in 2017. Her work has been published in 20 plus countries in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, The New Yorker, Granta, and many other publications. She is a graduate of Princeton, Harvard, and Iowa State Writers Workshop.
Iowa Writers Workshop. That's right. Good.
Amazing. Gosh, we're so excited to get to talk to you. So to start us off, we were hoping, since you've written quite a few personal essays also, as well as your award-winning memoirs, we were wondering if you could talk a bit about like how you began drafting some of your essays and what initially inspires you to write.
Okay. Well, I think that's a really good question, really broad question. And I think it changes all the time. Like the answer to it changes all the time. And I think, for me, it depends very much on what form I'm writing in. So, it's different for essays, for short stories, and for novels and for nonfiction books. With an essay, it often just starts with like an idea, something I want to say, I want people to take away from. And then I force myself away from the idea into a story, because you don't want to preach at people. You don't want to just say, okay, well, here's something I want to say to you about the world and like, listen to me because I'm me. I mean, that's kind of obnoxious. You start with a story, you start with something visceral and tangible, and then you kind of take the reader to that idea. But that idea is always present, like the thing that I want them now to know that they didn't know before, right? So for me, it starts there for an essay. There's always this kind of this purpose in an essay, this kind of drive to say something that doesn't necessarily start out the point with short stories. With short stories, for me, it's often something like, I like to start with absurd things that happen between people. So short stories often happen if I'm out in the world and I see something just crazy, like I can't believe that just happened. I have to write a short story around it. So like, for example, one of my favorite short stories that I wrote, it's called A Ride Out of Frau, and it's about this daughter that goes and visits her mother in Thailand, and the mother is like in the Peace Corps, and she's having this like midlife crisis. But the way that started is because I went to visit my mother in Thailand, and we ended up with like trying to get out of this tiny town and having to go door to door knocking, looking for someone with a car, right? And as we did that, the crowd around us, kind of every house we went to, the inhabitants of that house would follow us to the next house, to the next house, to the next house, until the whole village was following us. And just that incredibly absurd experience of like the whole village following these Western visitors from house to house, that was the heart of a short story. It's just like bizarre things that happen between people. And then I think, you do with bigger books start off with a wide combination of that. Like books take so long to germinate. They often start off, with a character or, with something you want to show, a life you want to show, a truth that you want to show, and then you add to it, all of the visceral details, all of the drama, and also the themes and the things that you want to say to the world. So it's less kind of a single point of.
As someone who writes both fiction and nonfiction, could you tell us about some of the writing tools you learned from fiction writing that transpire onto your autobiographical pieces?
Yeah. Well, I think when I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, it was like a fiction program. So, I mean, everything that we were submitting to each other was fiction. Everything that we were, learning was from fiction. But I think that what we were actually learning wasn't about fiction or nonfiction. We were learning how to tell a story and to bring to life something. And that could be something that has happened or that has not happened. But we learned how to create a narrative. We learned how to create tension and drama, because, and we learned like a story is not about, it's not about huge things happening. It's about things just about to happen, things that people aren't saying to each other, instead of like, and I think a lot of beginning storytellers, especially if they're writing their own stories from their own life, they go right to the big explosions, right? Okay, when what they should be doing is creating the tension before the explosion, there's this famous saying, I don't know who said it, about how drama is not, I think it's a Hitchcock saying, like, drama is not the bomb going off, it's the bomb under the table, right? Like, as you have dinner, that's drama, right? So it's that's kind of one of the things that we learned that has helped me in fiction and nonfiction. And then also writing beautiful sentences, that beautiful sentences is not about the abstract, it's about the tangible, it's about the five senses. It's about bringing to life just the strangeness of a particular moment through the five senses. What is it that you see here in this scene that is singular and no one will ever forget? So I think those things translate really well across fiction, nonfiction, sometimes even drama. I mean, we learned how to write dialogue really well, which helps write drama. These things are all just storytelling in different forms.
How do you know that the stories that you tell need to be heard?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways of assessing that. And we talked a lot about what makes a story important. I talk about this with other writers, but also in the writers' workshop and everything. We talked a lot about what makes a story important. I mean, to me, certain stories are absolutely vital to tell because they change the way people behave and then the world that we ultimately create. I mean, I write stories of refugees, and right now we're going through a time of incredible hostility toward refugees. And the way that we as Westerners feel toward refugees, it affects their lives because it affects how we vote, and it affects who we put into place as policymakers, and it affects who we put in place as gatekeepers. And that has an actual tangible effect on the lives of the people that escape their countries and seek refuge in ours, right? But I think it goes beyond that, because there's a lot of other stories that are really, really important that aren't connected to some big, political, like contemporary issue. Right. So, for example, so how do you know, I guess, a story is important? And I think that has to do with the kind of underlying truth and how much, how much singularity and vulnerability the story shows. So we were always taught that when you have characters saying things to each other, you want them to always be accidentally revealing things about themselves that they don't want to have revealed, and in that way we learn something about all the things that people don't say. And I think that a story that shows honestly the relationship and the conflict between two people, something that is, the kind of conflict we've all felt, it's an important story because it shows something new about being human with other people in this world. And so I think a story that has been crafted in this way, a story that is honest and reaches some underlying truth, that is an important story,
I really love that ideology. And our next question is kind of in a similar vein. I'm wondering, particularly in your essays, even though you're obviously talking about like very specific experiences, they felt extremely relatable. How do you achieve that sense of universality in your pieces?
Well, I think one of the mistakes that beginning writers make is to think that in order to be universal, they have to generalize, to be general. But writers know that you achieve this kind of universal feeling, a feeling of relatability, by going into the specific, getting more specific, getting more singular. Some bizarre detail from your everyday life, will strike me as more true and interesting, even if it's not a part of my life, than you generalizing about your day. Do you see what I mean? Like if I I mean, what's more visceral and relatable for me to say right now, oh God, I'm starving, or for me to sit here and just like gobble up almonds, like the gobbling up almonds is more relatable, and that I'm starving. So when you're writing something, it's better not to say general things about what people want, what they're feeling, what they're, experiencing, and to show it with these details that are singular to them. And even if I'm allergic to almonds, I'm still going to get something very universal from seeing that happen, and I think that's how you do it. You go just into the five senses and into the detail of a person's life.
Can you talk about how you play with the past tense retrospective voice in your essays and memoirs?
What do you mean?
So luckily there's an example, because I didn't know what it meant either. But in in writing about past events, you can write from the perspective of past you and about what you thought knew when events occurred, but you can also use a retrospective voice in your later reflections on past experiences. And
okay, so you mean so that's called the point of telling.
Really?
Yes. So whereas like say the point of view is whose voice are you in, the point of telling is when in their life are you telling the story from, and how do I choose that in my stories? Well, I think it depends from story to story. So I think at first, I have a really good long think about what parts of the story I want to be, a revelation to the reader, and what parts of the story I want, I want to resonate from the beginning. So, for example, if I'm telling the story of somebody who is very unaware of their surroundings, very unself-aware. They don't know what's going to happen to them, and they're very unsure. You can put them in the moment, and you can give them you can have the person say everything that they're, experiencing, and still they don't see what the reader sees. And that can be really interesting. They're kind of an unreliable narrator, but they're also kind of an incomplete, like not fully understanding narrator, right? And the reader gets the pleasure of seeing things that the actual, the character, the protagonist doesn't see, right? But then, if you have, say, a protagonist that really has thought through all of these things and really is looking back after a long time, you have to evaluate, well, is all of that wisdom helping the story? If I tell that story from 50 years later, from 20 years later, 30 years later, I mean, is all of it just so self-evident that it kills all of the drama in the story? Is it better for me to go back and tell it from their point of view as they saw, something as a little kid, or whenever the situation? Often with nonfiction, I use my own lens, the incomplete information that I have as a witness, as a watcher, and that is enough, to create a sense of mystery and drama and tension. But I think that decision is completely driven by the requirements of the story, right? It's not about, I'm not trying to paint a complete picture. I'm trying to make an exciting, good story, and I think that's the important distinction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In reading your interview with the American Writers Museum, I came across a quote where you talk about asylum interviews and how many Iranian refugees essentially tell their stories in, how you put it, an Iranian way, only to be met with misunderstanding. So telling one's own story is a very vulnerable thing to do, obviously, whether it's forced due to the circumstances or voluntary in the way that you write about yourself. We're curious about how you approach that aspect of writing personal essays and memoirs, that like inherent vulnerability, and whether you feel pressure to write in a way that the story's full impact can be felt by a Western reader.
Well, I think this is a pressure that people often feel when they're new to a place and when they don't understand their audience. And this is why it happens so much to newcomers and immigrants and asylum seekers. First of all, they have to use their story as a means of getting in, which is really heartbreaking. You have to tell a story and convince someone to believe you, to say, this is the true tragic experience, and as a result, I need help, I need refuge. It's really heartbreaking for the thing that gets you into safety to be the believability of your story, or the power of your story, especially when you've learned to tell stories according to these two different cultures. As I said, Eastern culture and Western culture teach us very different things about what is a good story, what's a believable story. Now, for me, you asked if I feel this pressure. After many years of studying writing, I don't feel this pressure, because I think I can move back and forth, and I understand how to tell a convincing story to these various audiences. So I understand, I guess, my audience is enough to feel confident in the kind of stories that I want to tell, which is why I guess I took it upon myself to translate some of these stories, not the language of the stories, or not only the language of the stories, but to translate them into a storytelling form that's kind of informed by all of this Western education, right? And so yeah, so I think it's not a struggle for me now. It's just a struggle that I see in myself years ago, and I see in fellow immigrants and refugees, that there, and this kind of understanding that there is no one good way to tell a story. And I think in our Western education, we have been taught that there's one way, and we've been taught that by starting with, like, say, the Greek dramas, Greek tragedies, the three-act play. You build up the tension, you drop, you raise. All of these movie tropes come from that. They come from theater. They come from the three-act play. Like in movies, they cut to the chase, cut right to the conflict. These are cliches, but they are our storytelling education in the Western world. An Iranian person has learned to tell stories completely differently, right? They have studied old Persian poetry. They are more kind of focused on the beauty of the language. They are also, like, in Iran, one joke I always kind of make is that there was this asylum lawyer who said that he had a lot of trouble with his Iranian asylum seekers because they would never start the story. They didn't start the story at the beginning of their conflict, and they didn't start the story at the beginning of their lives. They would always start their story at the beginning of the universe, at the start of the universe. But that's because Iranians, as children, we were taught to start every story with a rhyme, which is the beginning of the universe rhyme. And it's part of the culture, like putting your story in a larger context, right? And learning, like, kind of changing your lens so that it encapsulates the world. That is Eastern storytelling standard that just would absolutely fail in a Western setting where you have to zoom in, get right to the conflict of this situation. And while both are perfectly good ways to tell a story, there's only one that is convincing to the people with power.
I think I'm gonna have to go read more Iranian stories now. It sounds so poetic, especially the whole you said the rhyme of the universe or something like it starts off at the beginning of the universe. That sounds lovely. It sounds completely different from what I expected, at least.
Children's rhyme. But I have to say, if you want to know a little bit about Iranian storytelling, a good kind of in between, someone who understands like his Western audience, but also tells stories in Iranian way, is a filmmaker called Abbas Kiarostami. Have you heard of Kiarostami?
No.
He is an award-winning, the most famous Iranian filmmaker of all time. He's won all these awards, and his movies are quite well known in the West, but they're also super Iranian. And sometimes Westerners will watch them and be like, well, nothing happened there. And then when you think about it, you're like, wow, but a lot happened. A lot of stuff happened. It just happened with a different pace, in a different way.
I will definitely go watch his movies now, because if they're anything like the stories you were just talking about, I think I'd enjoy them immensely.
Yes.
The next few questions we'll be asking will be less long-winded, I guess. They'll be things like, what's your favorite type of book, and stuff like that. So much easier.
Oops, am I being long-winded again?
No, we hit you with all the heavy hitters at first.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm teasing you.
What books have you currently been reading?
What books am I reading recently?
Yeah.
Right now I'm reading an amazing book called Interior Chinatown. It won the National Book Award, I think, this year, and it's kind of like, in movie making language, it's kind of like half script, half novel, but it's about being Asian American. It's about being Asian in a black and white world. It's about being somewhere in between It's a beautiful story. It's an absolutely gorgeous story. You should go read it. It's called Interior Chinatown. I'm also rereading. I was just recently rereading Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. Have you guys read this? It's one of the things that you maybe read in high school, but maybe read in college. But I think it's actually a perfect book for your age. And that was the first time I read it when I was, I think, about 19 or 20. And then I've read it every decade or so since. And a couple of days ago, I had to do an interview about it. So I read it again, and it was astonishing again. So it's all about, like, so it's this very famous poet named Rainer Maria Rilke, and he's German. And he writes letters to this young, poet, another person who he's talking to, and they're in their 20s. And they talk about love and religion. They write a lot about sex, like why, the whole thing is just a lot about, like, why are they telling us? Why are the adults telling us all of this horrible stuff about sex? Like, I don't believe any of it. I don't believe the church, But it also talks about, your solitude and how to create good art and all of these things. It's a beautiful book. You should read it.
Gosh, I need to write down all of your recommendations. No.
I can be long-winded about anything. Ask me my name and I'll take 10 minutes.
Well, our next question is on a similar vein, and we'll also allow that. In general, could you tell us, we want more recommendations, basically. Could you tell us what authors, or some of your favorites, what authors you recommend, especially, I think, from the lens of, like, young writers, and kind of looking for stories and writers to emulate, besides yourself, of course.
Do you know what? I would say that you should read very, very widely in lots of different styles. And the way to do that, and I think, to read all of the, my favorite writers would mean you might, like, miss a whole bunch of them. But I think the way I discovered my favorite writers is a really good recommendation for you, which is that I used to read short story anthologies. Like, I used to read Best American Short Stories and Henry Prize stories. I still do, and
I'm reading right now.
Huh?
That's what I'm reading right now. A collection of the best American short stories. Wonderful. So you read that and you see, like, oh, well, this is from 2016, 2017, whatever. Those are the writers that are, like, working today. And of course, not every great writer from that time is in a short story collection. But let's say if you read Best American Short Stories from, like, say, a decade, you get a really good idea of, like, who you like, what kind of writers you like. I discovered my favorite writer, Kazuo Ishiguro, and other ones like Alice Munro, and I discovered them all in anthologies because they wrote short stories, and then I went and read their novels.
Yeah. I remember reading short stories my freshman year and really enjoying it. And then my dad went and he bought me the Best American Short Story. I've only, but it was still good enough for me because I thought that short stories were the best form of writing for a really long time.
I still think that. I think that a short story is the hardest thing to do well, and it is the most satisfying form of storytelling, and it translates. This is why so many short stories get made into movies, because a short story is like a movie, and that's why it's so hard to get it exactly right, in such a short space. And it's I think it's underrated as a form.
I agree. I mean, we had an entire lesson on it. High schoolers now have to have an entire lesson on it, and we have to write our own stories in the end. And it was one of the most difficult things I did since I've been in high school, is writing a short story. I didn't do well on it, but that's okay. It takes practice.
Oh my God, it takes so long. I look back to some of the stories I wrote. I wrote a couple of short stories in my, like, late 20s, and I thought they were so good. And then I went back and I'm like, what is this? Like, what have I produced? I can't believe I let anyone see this. It's a really hard one to nail down because you can't cover an entire life. You know what a really good piece of advice I got about short stories is? One of my teachers in Iowa said, the way you decide where to start and end a story, is that if you imagine an entire person's life, right, the whole arc of their life from their birth to their death, right? Okay, you want to kind of lift out a wedge of their life where, if we just saw that wedge, you would know everything that came before and everything that came after, right? Like there is absolute, and there are only 2 or 3 moments in a life like that, you know? And so that's a good place to like start to tell an important story.
That makes sense.
I've never thought of it like that. I feel like I will never not think of it like that now that you put it in such a way.
Thanks.
I had similar thoughts to Joelle when you mentioned that whole wedge situation. I mean, that's all a short story really is, and I think that's lovely. I think short stories are really the best form of writing because it is complicated, like you said. You are in Paris right now, right? That's what we've heard.
I lived in Paris, but I moved down to a village in the south of France, but I'm in France. Yeah.
That's wonderful. My family owns a house in the south of France. It's the best part of France.
Where do they have a house?
Tourette-Salou.
Is that Western or Eastern?
I think it's Southwest, if I remember
Southwest.
correctly.
Okay, yeah. I'm more Southeast.
I can't remember entirely. It's been a while since I've been there, but we wanted to know what it's like writing in France, I guess.
Yeah.
And how different it is.
Well, for me, Paris was very similar to my life I've always lived in cities, so I lived in New York and Amsterdam and these cities are all, I mean, they're very different, but they all kind of make for a certain kind of life where you go to your cafes and you hang out with your friends. But then the pandemic hit. So life changed fundamentally in the first lockdown, of course, as it did for everyone. And then Paris became really difficult, especially if you live in a city apartment. You guys are from Chicago, you know what the spaces can be like, small, so we did a couple of months there, and then we decided, we can't possibly do, like, what if they lock us down here while they're in the heat of summer? So we moved down to a village. It's a very closed village. It's like only 40 or so residents. It's very old school. Like there's a chicken that runs around, and this is not a place where tourists pass by. This is where my partner, his aunts and uncles all live here. And it's just like real deep locals, it's been fascinating. No one speaks English. I've had to, punch up my French significantly. And then my 5-year-old daughter, we put her in the local school that has like 7 kids in the school. And it's just like, I can see the school from my window. This is a fake background, as you can tell. Okay. So of course, this background is the American Library of Paris, which is what I use because that's where I would be if I, but anyway, so she went to school, to the local school, and just learned French like that. And now she just makes fun of me for not speaking it well enough. So that's my life. I sit and I write and I drink coffee, and I have my daughter like verbally abuse me for not speaking French well enough, which is, by the way, quite a reckoning, because when I was a young immigrant kid, arrived to Oklahoma, I learned English like that, and then I abused my mother for not learning it fast enough. So, the mothers always say it'll come back around again. And
that's the process of things, right? I'm sure.
The circle of life.
Is your mom happy about your mom coaching your daughter?
I mean, is she happy that I'm learning my lesson? Oh yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Wow. Your life in that village sounds very picturesque.
It's very small, but it's good. It's COVID free, so we're happy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
To kind of end this section of today, you've already kind of shared a little bit of this, but we're curious if you could kind of conclude with one piece of helpful writing advice that you've received. That would be super awesome.
I will share 2. One is that you should read every day and read different things. And we've already talked about this, about the anthologies, all of that stuff. By the way, I was going to say, I forgot to say this when you were talking about anthologies, is that in the Best American 2018, I have a story. Read 2018. Yeah. But my other piece of advice, and nobody ever listens to this. I don't know why I keep telling people this. Maybe at some point don't publish too early. Like, Really don't, because it is so much better to have never published anything until you're 40 and to just keep getting better and better and better and come out with one big astonishing book or a short story or whatever, than it is to publish something at 20, think it's fantastic, and then at 28 be absolutely embarrassed that it lives on the internet, right? This is like the age of the internet. You can't like take back your bad writing, you know? And you don't really get to a place where you found your voice for many, many years. So I think you should just cherish the private time. Cherish the time where you're writing for your friends and teachers, reading tons and tons. Go to college, go to your, a writing program, and only after all that is over, then put work out into the world. I think I really believe in that, just because I think it's really important to give yourself some space, some solitude, space to create your voice, time to create only for you. And we live in such a world of put out content. And if you feel like doing that, do it on Instagram. Don't do it on, with your stories, which are important and powerful and worth kind of massaging into the very best version of themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. I know that I feel like that advice is very helpful as someone who is kind of figuring out how to, as you say, like nourish my stories and kind of where to put them and how to save them.
Yeah. And it's never too late for a story either, like there's always stories being published now about like the 90s or the 2000s. So it's like, it doesn't really, your story is not going to expire. And I think one thing that I also was worried about a lot when I was young, and now I don't worry about anymore, is, people worry about, oh, if I don't hurry up and publish a story, someone will publish something just like it. They won't. Every story, two stories can have the exact same, like storyline and be completely different. They can be about the same thing and be completely different. There is room in this world for both of them. Case in point is that I just wrote a book about my childhood, and my brother just wrote a book about our childhood, and we lived the same childhood, and these books are astonishingly different. Okay, so room for every story.
Yeah.
Okay, we are done with the interview portion. There wasn't that many questions. We didn't know how you would answer anything. So we finished our 10 questions, and we were wondering if you would like to read something. We heard that you wanted to read something, and there's plenty of time to do so if you'd like.
Sure. Are you? Am I coming through? Because one thing that's happening is you guys keep starting and stopping.
You are coming through perfectly well.
Okay, great. Why don't let me just mute this and go grab the book. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great.
Okay. Hey, so do you have something in mind you want me to read?
I think.
I didn't personally. Joelle may.
Do, just because I've been in preparation rapidly devouring all of your essays, and obviously I loved your essay that was the basis for your memoir, The Ungrateful Refugee. I was wondering, do you think you could share a bit of that book, if that feels appropriate, if you have a better idea? Then please.
Oh no, that's the book I grabbed.
Awesome.
But I just kind of disappears. Like
it blends in.
Exactly. But I'm wondering, is there any part of it? Should I just do the beginning?
I think the beginning would be good. Lucia, any thoughts?
The beginning is great.
Okay.
All right. I'll just read a little bit from the beginning. So I should say that this book has 3 threads kind of that run throughout. One is memoir of my own refugee years. Another is stories I gathered in 2017 and 18 about current refugees. And then a third is kind of this essayistic thread where I tie them together in my own voice. So the beginning is kind of a mix of two of those. Yeah. Okay. We became refugees. Somehow it felt more settled than what we had been for the past 10 months, hiding out in the United Arab Emirates. There, we were illegal. All the same dizzying displacement, uncertainty, and need, but we had to find our own shelter. Without a state to say, yes, we will be responsible for you, we were so unmoored, it was hard to fathom a next step. Maybe that's why every move had been last minute, someone's kindness or a stroke of luck. Miracles. And so, when we landed in Rome in winter 1989, I bubbled with love for Italy and every Italian. It was unlike anything I had felt for Dubai or Sharjah. The airport was so European, so brimming with leisure. I wanted to run to every kiosk and smell the Western chocolate and touch the expensive fabrics. But a man in a black suit held a sign with Mama's name, and we were led away to a car. My mother, younger brother, and I bundled in the back seat, cold and dirty from the long flight. I tried to stay awake for the ride through the Italian countryside. Finally, after an hour, we spotted a house on a hill, breaking up the rolling valleys in the distance. We had been told that we'd be taken to a good refugee camp, a temporary safe space for transients seeking asylum outside Italy. It was called Barba, and it had once been a hotel. The Italian government had leased this building to house the likes of us, political and religious asylum seekers and passers through with particular need, elderly families. It was exciting to watch Barba appear and to know that even though our clothes and bedding and daily routines would be those of refugees, though we would be confined there, our house would be on a hilltop in the husk of a pretty hotel. We pulled up a winding hill road after dinner time. Our room was small, perhaps even smaller than the cockroach hostel in Sharjah, and we had no fridge or hot plate this time, only a bathroom and a bed. We sat on our bed and wondered where we'd get money, if we'd find friends among our neighbors. Would we meet Farsi speakers? How long would we stay? Which country would finally take us? We wondered about that night's meal. We considered walking to a store in Mentana. Then someone knocked. An Italian woman, young, with a punkish haircut, gestured to us that we had missed the dinner call. That night, for the first time, I saw the canteen, a glass circle overlooking all that lush valley. Now empty and dark, in the morning it would fill up with displaced families like us, Iranians, Afghans, Russians, Romanians. It would buzz with many languages, many kinds of prayers. There would be children, mothers, grandmothers. But for now, the room was silent. We ate bowls of leftover pasta in semi-dark and heavy silence, and thank God that meals were provided here. Despite its grand skeleton, Hotel Barba was a refugee camp, and we had to stay put, as we had no status in Italy. We were served soup, pasta, coffee, bread at precise times each day, and we sat in the winter chill, praying that by summer we'd be gone from there. Every day when the postman arrived, we would swell outside the mail cubbies, jostling for a good view. We wanted to know who got his letter today. When someone did, the crowd would hush as he opened the envelope, fingers trembling, eyes scanning. Then, either wept quietly into his palm, muttering curses, or loudly on his knees, thanking his God. Everyone was frantic for a letter from America or England or Australia or Canada, roomy Anglophone countries. A letter would mean the wait was over. Our lives could now begin. I'll stop there.
That was wonderful.
Thanks.
Of course.
I'm still taking in, but that was really, gosh, the way you led through the story, I really enjoyed. Thank you so, so much. It has
No
been
problem.
absolutely a pleasure to talk to you. I feel like this has been I feel like a crash course in how to write. And I think I learned a bazillion new things that I'm going to I want to go write and use all of your advice immediately after this.
Thank you. Thank you. And you know what, if the audience here would be writers, I would also recommend 2 books. I would recommend you guys read a book called The Art of Subtext by Charles Baxter. I'm going to type it here. The Art of Subtext, Charles Baxter. Yeah. I would also recommend a book called Invisible Ink by Brian McDonald. And it's a book actually about screenwriting, but it also talks a lot about the story arc, which is really fantastic. And I would also recommend a book called On Writing by Stephen King. And yes, it is that Stephen King. And he wrote a wonderful, wonderful book about writing.
Amazing. We will all be rapidly devouring your recommendations very soon, I expect. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know timing is all different, and you taking the time out of your day to come talk to us and share your wonderful knowledge is really, really meaningful. So thank you.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me. It was really fun talking to you.